Welcome to China Now with me, Makiza Latifa, your weekly window into the pulse of modern China. From groundbreaking innovations to global partnerships, we bring you the stories shaping the world's second largest economy. And each week we dive into the latest headlines with China Currents, engage with top scholars and analysts in the Thinkers Forum, and explore how China's development impacts the global stage. Stay with us because in this edition, we'll talk about the presence of Western tech giants in China, the Chinese foreign minister's visit to Japan, and then China's breakthrough in brain computer interface technology. Let's get started.
China Currents is a weekly news talk show from China to the world. We cover viral news about China every week and also give you the newest updates on China's cutting-edge technologies. Let's get started. Welcome to China Currents, your weekly news report on the latest developments in China. I'm Chris, and in this episode, Western tech giants come to China. Chinese foreign minister visits Japan. China's breakthrough in brain-computer interface technology. First, let's move to Beijing. The 2025 China Development Forum was held in Beijing from March 24th to 25th. As a platform for direct dialogue between Chinese leaders and multinational corporations, international organizations, and foreign scholars, the forum outlines China's annual development priorities, making it one of the most closely watched events by global investors. This year's forum attracted 750 foreign delegates, including 86 executives from multinational companies across 21 countries. Among them were tech and semiconductor giants from the US and Europe, including CEOs from Apple, Siemens, Samsung, Qualcomm, and SK Hynix. John Neuffer, president of the US Semiconductor Industry Association, also attended. Ironically, Bloomberg recently reviewed that Trump's administration is sketching out tougher versions of US semiconductor curbs and pressuring key allies to escalate their restrictions on China's chip industry. Why do Western tech giants still turn to China? A key breakthrough in China that can resolve critical challenges in AI and chip development may tell the truth. The AI industry's relentless pursuit of higher computing power and advanced chips has hit a roadblock: overheating. As transistors and chips become increasingly dense, heat dissipation has emerged as a bottleneck. In November 2024, Reuters reports revealed overheating issues in NVIDIA's Blackwell AI chips and server racks. By January 2025, unresolved thermal problems, causing reduced computing power and melted interfaces, forced Microsoft, Amazon, Google, and Meta to slash orders for new chips and revert to older models. The information reveals that NVIDIA reportedly pushed suppliers to redesign components, but solutions remain elusive. Silicon-based materials, it seems, have reached their thermal limits. Unfortunately, China's synthetic diamonds can help. Diamond's thermal conductivity is 13 times that of silicon and 4 times that of silicon carbide. Chips made with diamond substrates could drastically lower operating temperatures. A report by China's Kaiwan Securities estimates that diamond cooling technology could save data centers millions in cooling costs annually. Though the diamond thermal solutions market is currently valued at just 20 million, it is projected to soar to 15.2 billion by 2030. Western firms are taking note. US startup Akash Systems, for instance, developed a diamond-cooled GPU technology, securing 18.2 million in federal grants and 50 million in tax breaks. Yet, considering China produces 70% of the world's synthetic diamonds, most of these funds may ultimately flow to Chinese companies. Beyond raw materials, China also holds key patents for diamond chips manufacturing. Previously, diamond films were either too small, too rough, or too expensive for mass production. But in December 2024, researchers from Peking University, Southern University of Science and Technology, and the University of Hong Kong unveiled a breakthrough method to produce large, ultra-thin, and ultra-smooth diamond films at a reasonable cost. Published in Nature, this innovation paves the way for industrial-scale diamond chip production. China is also spearheading other next-generation semiconductor technologies. In March 2025, Hangzhou Jiaren Semiconductor launched the world's first 8-inch gallium oxide wafer. While the US poured resources into computing power hegemony, China's focus on practical applications has driven its rise. Chinese strategist Professor Wang Xiangsui notes that US tech development is capital and AI hype driven, with over half of its wealth funneled into 7 tech giants like Nvidia and Microsoft. This obsession with computing power has neglected real-world applications and diversified semiconductor use cases. In contrast, China's tech sector prioritizes solving tangible challenges. Its advancements in aerospace, electric vehicles, and 5G networks have created diverse demands for chips. For example, Huawei began developing diamond chips technology in 2023 to address heat dissipation in 5G base stations and low-orbit satellites, filing patents with Harbin Institute of Technology. Though Chinese tech firms lag behind US giants in market value, their demand-driven model, emphasizing affordability, energy efficiency, and practicality, offers lessons for global players. That's why in 2025, Beijing has become a classroom for the world's tech elites. Next up, hello Tokyo. On March 22nd, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi met with Japanese counterpart in Tokyo during the 6th China-Japan High-Level Economic Dialogue. The meeting marked Wang's first visit to Japan in 4.5 years. The two sides reached a consensus on 20 key issues, expanding collaboration beyond traditional economic ties to prioritize marine environmental protection, combat marine debris, and strengthen monitoring mechanisms for nuclear wastewater. On March 12th, Tokyo Electric Power Company released a new round of 7,800 tons of nuclear contaminated water into the Pacific Ocean. Since August 2023, the total amount has reached 85,800 tons. China has emphasized in the 20 consensus that there is no change in China's position of opposing the unilateral activation of the discharge by the Japanese side. The stance underscores Beijing's dual focus on safeguarding public health and addressing ecological risks to Pacific neighbors. Pacific Island Forum Secretary General Baron Waka said, "We have done our best to get Japan not to commence the discharge until there is full agreement that it is verifiably safe to do so. But Japan has taken a sovereign decision. What we need to focus on now is to hold Japan to account." China conducted independent sampling in October 2024. On January 23rd this year, the China Atomic Energy Agency announced the test results for the first time. The activity concentrations of tritium, cesium-137, and strontium-90 in the samples were normal. However, CAEA emphasized that the results only reflect the radiation level of a specific time and place. China will continue to carry out international monitoring and independent sampling to prevent the discharge of Fukushima nuclear contaminated water into the sea from causing irreversible consequences. Moving on, China is promoting public health in the most challenging field. On March 20th, a Chinese patient who can't speak due to amyotrophic lateral sclerosis regained the ability with the brain-computer interface's help. Assisted by a neurosurgical robotic system, Chinese Dr. Zhao Guoguang precisely implanted the device into the region of the brain responsible for language motor control. Although the patient is unable to speak physically, the brain still generates specific electrical signals when attempting to form words. The BCI system captures these signals and decodes them using advanced algorithms, effectively translating the patient's thoughts into spoken phrases. Remarkably, after just 3 hours of training, the patient was able to produce full sentences such as, "I want to drink water," and "I want to go for a walk with my family," through brain signals. Clinical data shows the single word decoding latency of under 100 milliseconds set the highest performance benchmark globally. The system called Beinao-1 was developed by the Chinese Institute of Brain Research and marks the world's first successful wireless, implantable BCI designed specifically for the Chinese language. Although this technology is just being introduced for clinical application, China's National Healthcare Security Administration established a market guidance price for treatment costs on March 12th, ensuring that this medical technology remains accessible and affordable for different income groups. And that's all for today. Thank you for watching this episode of China Currents. If you have any thoughts or comments, please leave it below. See you next time.
Now we turn to the Thinkers Forum, where we engage with leading scholars analysts, and experts to explore the deeper insights behind China's global relations, economic policies, and cultural influence. Today, we welcome our first guest, Professor Zhu Lan, Dean of Schwarzman College, Tsinghua University. Let's dive into the conversation, shall we?
If you follow the China's S&T development since the late 1970s, China's reform, S&T has been an area that every generation of Chinese leaders have paid a lot of attention and have pushed for reform and have promoted the development of the area. So I think that has really led to a very strong research base in almost all major fields in S&T area. I think that provided a very strong base, both in terms of research, but also in terms of talents. So in fact, I think as you all know that the DeepSeek's, all of the people are trained locally in China. But that's certainly, I think, the Chinese government's role. But let me also say that the local government in Hangzhou has also played a very important role. So it's not coincident to see that DeepSeek actually grew out of Hangzhou, where Alibaba also claimed Hangzhou as a home. Hangzhou has become a sort of hotspot for innovation, particularly on AI and internet and so on. And because of the local government has been very supportive, and they were able to create an ecosystem that's really very nice for the new startups, for companies to work in the area without feeling the pressure. If you think of support research is an industrial policy, then people can say that China has had an industrial policy for many years, because I think China has supported AI research since as early as the 1980s. I know the Chinese Association of AI Research was started in 1980s. So there were, I think, some national R&D plans that AI has been part of that. But that's mainly supporting academic research in universities and in research institutes. If you have sort of industrial policies more of supporting enterprises, I think that's a different story. If you see Chinese AI industry, it's mainly private enterprise. They have been playing a very active role, a leading role. If you know the story about DeepSeek, this is somebody who's done quantitative sort of trading and used the money he earned and to get into this AI. There, I think the government policy is more about how to provide proper governance. I think there were a lot of hypes about so-called the geopolitical competition in AI. If you look at domestically, in AI has been developed more in the sense of how actually it can generate services and efficiency and so on. So I think for many of the companies, they worry about how to actually find applications and how to find business models to make money out of it. I don't think Alibaba is concerned about geopolitics, and Tencent is worried about US companies and so on. So they are very much focused on domestic market. They're focused on commercial applications. So I think that's probably the general context of AI development. Of course, since 2022, so large models became so the hot thing to people to pursue. So I think many of these companies also, they wanted to also to try to follow suit and develop big models. You might argue that that might be a competition indeed. Today, this model performs better, tomorrow the other performs better, but still in the context of a commercial competition rather than in the geopolitics sense. So I would say that that's sort of more the general context of AI development in China, if you look at from inside. Basically, if you ask companies, and they are much more concerned about how actually they can get a big model, how can find application. So I would argue that many people internationally view DeepSeek as a major turning point in geopolitics, in geopolitical competition of AI between US and China. But I think domestically, a lot of people see this as a turning point of really making the big model into what people call the vertical application. That is
Mm.
in domain-specific application. It really lower the threshold for many companies to join to use the big models. So I think that thousands of institutions of all kinds began to use DeepSeek, and also I think probably several hundreds of millions of people are now using in their whatever the software the hardware they use. Indeed, certainly I think Chinese media is very similar to the the media you saw. They certainly wanted to put those in the geopolitical context. But I think in terms of you look at the company and look at the researchers in universities and the research institute, they are not much different from what you saw in, say, UK, US. People focus on what they do, and they are indeed very excited about the abilities being offered by all these kind of AI models. So the AI for science and so on. There, I think there's not much different. The AI is such a wide thing, trying to separate global AI development ecosystem into different pieces. I don't think that's easy. If you
Mm.
look at the research communities, I think before the year of 2018 or 19, there's a very intense collaboration between U.S. and China, in terms of academia, very strong collaborations. And also in terms of an AI system, I think there's also very wide applications and collaborations and also people circulating back and forth. So I think there's a sort of kind of global ecosystem that's open source, and people learn from each other. For example, I think that some people argue that actually there are some Chinese AI papers were cited probably most in the AI field. So you might argue that the Meta's model maybe have some roots in the Chinese Research Institute, and you can also argue Alibaba's model may have also something from the US. So I don't know whether you can have whether you're able to say, okay, this technology is US, and indeed, I think there are indeed models from different companies. If you use that as a way, of course, we know there are, all kind of models from different companies.
And next on the Thinkers Forum, we are honored to welcome Peter Turchin, a renowned complexity scientist and author of the compelling book End Times, Elites, Counter-Elites, and the Path of Political Disintegration, in which he explores the dynamics that lead to societal cohesion and collapse, focusing on the roles of elites and counter-elites in political disintegration. Stay tuned for his brilliant analysis.
So, in fact, back in 2010, I published a short article in the premier science journal called Nature, where I have actually published a forecast which said that given the trends that had been developing prior to 2010, predicts that United States will get into high instability situation by 2020. At that point, I had no idea about Donald Trump, or it would be called MAGA movement or whatever. If Donald Trump was not there, or was assassinated, things would still happen. Maybe not now, but 4 years later. So we are looking to multiple years of social turbulence and political instability. My research group here in Vienna at the Complexity Science Hub, we have collected data now on hundreds of past societies over the last 5,000 years since the first state appeared. And so what we see is that states can actually function well for a period of time, about a century or so, sometimes less, sometimes more. But then inevitably, at least in the past, they enter into the period of social turbulence, political violence. So those are end times about which the book is about. So the United States had a previous period of political turbulence, which peaked during the American Civil War. And then it continued until, roughly speaking, 1920s, when there was another peak of instability, like urban riots, assassinations, many other political violence events, right, which did not, fortunately, lead to any kind of revolution or civil war, because the American elites managed to push through a set of reforms that essentially rebalanced the economy and allowed the United States to become a very prosperous nation. So that period after the New Deal, even despite the World War II, the wages of American workers grew very rapidly. They grew together with the GDP. Right. But what happened in the 1970s, right? Two generations later, the American leaders have become sort of complacent. This is what I call the iron law of oligarchy. They basically started to go back away from the reforms of the New Deal era. For example, they allowed suppression of labor unions. There were many different types of things. They started reduced taxes on themselves and so on. What I call this, they turned on what I call the wealth pump. Right? The productivity continued to grow, but the wages stagnated and even declined. And so all that extra wealth that flowed from workers to the economic elites. All right. So that set up these three factors which drove the country into crisis. First of all, it created what we call popular immiseration. This was stagnating and even declining living standards of the majority of the population. Secondly, it has created a huge number of wealth holders. So the numbers of decamillionaires, so people with $10 million or more in wealth, has grown tenfold over the past 40 years. And the numbers of billionaires has grown even more. All right. The third outcome is because of the immiseration to escape precarious living conditions. Many people from the common American class, right? They wanted to escape. And how do you do it if you don't inherit wealth? You go to college, and then college degree is not enough, right? So you try to get a professional degree, like law degree or PhD, like what I have, and so on and so forth. So what this created, what the situation you call elite overproduction, all right? So many, not all, but many of the wealth holders, Trump is of course the best example, but not the only one. Michael Bloomberg is another, and many others. They actually try to convert their wealth into political power. Right, they either themselves become candidates or like supports other people running for office. Right, and so you have many more people now competing for those offices. And on the other side, on the credential side, we have huge numbers of especially lawyers. All right, law degree is the good route to political office. And again, you have 4 or 5 times as many lawyers as there are positions for them. And so there is again a lot of elite aspects. So these elite wannabes, what the problem is that some competition for power positions is good, but too much competition starts to corrode the societal frameworks. So because we have now 3, 4, 5 times as many people competing for, I mean, even maybe 10 times as many people competing for the limited number of power positions. So in politics, for example, only one president, 100 senators, and so on and so forth. Right. So what happens to those who lose in this competition? Frustrated. Many of them turn into counter elites. These are people who actually start working against the established elites. So they attempt now to overthrow them. And that's precisely what we saw in the French Revolution, for example, with people like Robespierre, or the Russian Revolution, Vladimir Lenin, and many other examples in the history. What happened was that the counter elites, so they have overthrown the established elites. So who are the established elites? Prior to 2016, for example, right, we had 2 parties, and one of them was the Republicans was the party of the wealth, or 1%. And Democrats were the party of the credentialed people, so the 10%. So the rest of the population did not really get any voice in politics. And then what happened was that as Trump, in his MAGA movement, took over the Republican Party, they converted it from the party of wealth holders to, at least they claim it, the party of the right-wing populist party, to represent the common people. And meanwhile, there was some sorting going back and forth. So Democrats became simply the party of the ruling class because some of the Republicans left the Republican Party and went to the Democrats. So many neocons, for example, did that, and vice versa. Some of the former members of the Democratic Party, like Robert F. Kennedy Jr. or Tulsi Gabbard, right? They switched to the MAGA movement within the Republican Party. So we have this coalition counter elites, which is, of course, Trump is sort of the center figure of it, but it would be a mistake to think that focus just on him. He has, as I mentioned, politicians like Tulsi Gabbard and RFK Jr. He has also brought up people like J.D. Vance. J.D. Vance moved up through the ranks of the Republican Party. And then, of course, we have wealth holders like Musk, which is very important. And he also is a counter elite because he was very unhappy with how he was treated, and on the ideological front we have people like Tucker Carlson. So you can see it's a power network. So they have now managed to get into power. Everybody now understands. When I was writing my book 2 years ago, I said we are in a revolutionary situation. But now we are in a true revolution because, first of all, there are two aspects of revolution. First of all, it's the revolution of the elites, right? And that's what Trump and his power network is trying to do. They're trying to replace the established elites with their own members. But also, not all revolutions are transformative. But the intent is to make this revolution transformative. So, for example, they are trying to change the attitudes towards DEI, genders, towards their role, very important, the role of America in the geopolitical scene. It is a very typical thing that once the revolutionaries come to power, they tend to start fighting amongst themselves. So there is a saying, I forget who said it, but about the French Revolution, they said that revolution devours its children, that revolution eats its children. So it is a very interesting question whether this coalition will break apart, because we see the tensions already. There are some right-wing populists like J.D. Vance and also Steve Bannon, who does not have any formal position, but he is influential, right? And then we have libertarian Silicon Valley types. So already Steve Bannon for example, is criticizing Elon Musk a lot. But so it all depends. It all depends on the personalities. Whether it's it looks like, for example, Musk and Trump have a personal friendship. How well it will survive the tensions and the stresses that they will undoubtedly go through is a big question. I don't think that Trump and his movement really understand the forces that drive the societies. For example, they worry about the well-being of common Americans. But notice that none of what they have done so far has really helped the workers. And of course, it's a very difficult problem. So we would have to, there's many ways that they would need to do it, increase minimum wage, actually increase taxes on the rich, but Trump has done the opposite. Then industrial policy, which would bring well-paying jobs back to the States. Actually, Trump is for that, but that takes a long time to implement. There is another element on the road to crisis, which is the weakness of the state that results from becomes much greater than revenues, and so the states get into debt. That's doesn't always happen, but it's a very common feature. So what Musk is doing with his Doge is actually trying to reverse this problem. But I don't see them yet understanding that they have to turn off the wealth pump. All right, so that I don't see happening yet. Essentially, if you give people power, right, they are tempted to use it for their own ends, right, for their own enrichment. That's why human societies go into cycles. This is the iron law of oligarchy. One of the Davos, I forget, a year or two ago was about inequality. It was the main theme. And they all talked about it, and they agreed that, economic growth will take care of it. That's a very self-serving attitude. Economic growth is not taking care of it. We have lots of economic growth, but its fruits are not going to the common people. So it's the vested powers. They have interest in They have selfish interest. And as a result of that, they undermine the societies that sustain them. And that's how they end up oftentimes in revolutions. So far, I'm actually very heartened that we have not had huge amounts of violence. All right. But we are in a very fragile situation. It can escalate. One group starts using methods, the other side will respond, and that can quickly escalate into the actual civil war. All right. Then territorial fragmentation along the lines of American Civil War in 1860s, that still is possible because now the more liberal states like California, for example, right, as they call them, the left coast, so California, Oregon, and Washington, they have been actually fairly quiet right now, but it's only been 1 month. We'll see, because they are planning to resist, for example, the forced deportations. That is a potential flashpoint that can lead to more violence, right? But for now, it looks like that the previous ruling elites, right, they have been so shocked by what's happening that they actually don't know how to react. All right, have not yet organized themselves into a reactionary, counter-revolutionary party. This will probably happen, but we'll see.
And as we conclude today's Thinkers Forum, we are privileged to host Louise Vincent-Gerv, founding partner and CEO of Gavekal Group. Louise Vincent has extensively analyzed China's economic trajectory and its burgeoning influence across global industries. He posits that China has not only caught up, but in many areas has leapfrogged the West, establishing dominance even at the pinnacle of technological innovation. In this segment, he'll explore the factors contributing to China's rapid ascent in sectors such as advanced manufacturing and artificial intelligence. He'll also share his insights on how China's strategic policies and investments has positioned it at the forefront of global innovation. Stay tuned for more details.
It is the start of an important bull market in China. I think we're going through a very, very important shift in narrative, both amongst domestic investors and foreign investors when looking at Chinese equities. Now, China essentially dominates every industry in the world, even at the very pinnacle of technology. I think this is why DeepSeek matters. DeepSeek shows that even at the very top of technology, China can compete with the West or even go above the West. And so this gives a lot of comfort to the leadership. It's like all of a sudden, the fears that China's growth could be contained by a Western blockade are essentially gone. And so now we're entering into a new phase where the leadership keeps talking about boosting domestic consumption, about boosting the domestic consumer. And if you want to do that, the simplest way to boost confidence, because what China suffers from is a lack of confidence, one way to boost confidence is to get a stock market bull market going. And I think that started last in basically February 2024. So it's a little over a year's old now. And for a year, Chinese stocks have been moving higher. I think a Chinese equity bull market is starting. Foreigners are just waking up to it. Domestic investors are just waking up to it. Flows are starting to pick up, but it's just the beginning of a story that should last many years. I'm sure you've heard this saying that bull markets climb a wall of worry. That's what bull markets do. You have all these concerns, and the bull markets just drive through them. And I think that today you're seeing this. It's very typical behavior where everybody focuses on the negative because we've had 3-4 years of really bad stock markets. So everybody focuses on negative. It's like, this isn't going to last. Real estate bad news. Confidence is so bad, etc. But the markets just continue to move ahead. It's very, very typical of how bull markets evolve. When you have to be worried about the bull market is when everybody thinks it's going to keep going higher. When everybody says, sunshine every day, ice cream for breakfast, when everything is awesome, that's when you have to worry about the bull markets. And in China, to your point, we're not there. Now, there's no doubt that the Chinese economy's had basically 5-6 really rough years. Some of that was self-inflicted. To be honest, the COVID lockdowns lasted for too long and really shook people's confidence. Now, the reality, though, remains that if you take a step back, China's economy today is by far the most competitive economy in the world. And you see this through Chinese trade numbers. China's trade surplus keeps on making new highs every single month. China's trade surplus right now is about 90 billion a month, US dollars. It's no country has ever run a trade surplus this big. And it's a real testimony to how competitive Chinese businesses are. And you take any field, you take automobiles, you take industrial robots, you take train building, power plant building, solar panels, batteries, you name it, China's at the top of the global game today. And to the point where very few can compete. When you start off with that, like what should be happening is all the people making money selling solar panels, selling batteries, selling all the things that China's selling. They should be taking that money and reinvesting it at home or consuming. But because their confidence has been crushed, because people are so afraid, they just do one of three things with it. They either take that money and leave it at the bank, and the banks, because there's no demand for credit, the banks have nothing to do but buy bonds, and bond yields go to new lows. Option one. Option two, they buy gold. And then the third thing they do, if they can, is they keep that money abroad. So you look at Hong Kong, US dollar bank deposits in Hong Kong have grown by $250 billion over the past couple of years. It's just enormous amounts of money. Now, if the Chinese government manages to boost people's confidence, both the businesses and the individuals, the money is there and the money keeps coming in, 90 billion a month. So I think we're in the process of mending that confidence. And so I actually think that the government's 5% target is achievable. So really, very few people have traveled in China in the past 5 years, which is crazy because it's obviously the second biggest economy in the world. And it's still growing, decently. Just walking around the streets, there's so many car brands that didn't exist 5 years ago, 10 years ago, producing really high quality cars and at very, very affordable price points. So the Western world has completely missed out on this story. I keep saying, look, you have to go see China. You can't underestimate how much it has changed in 5 years on so many different fronts, because it's not just the manufacturing, it's also the fintech. I wrote this piece about a year ago now called, Prejudice in China. People are holding on to past prejudices. They might have gone to China 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And back then, China was an economy that essentially produced cheap goods cheaply. It's like it was, China quality was seen as inferior. For a lot of people, if you haven't been to China in the past 5 years, that's what they're still stuck with. It's a frame of reference that has been bypassed. The assumption I think most Westerners have is it's communist, therefore it's going to fail because all the other communist countries have failed. Now, I always say, well, look, the interesting thing today about China is the CCP has been in power longer than the Soviet Union existed. China doesn't feel like it's collapsing at all. You're getting better trains, you're getting, less pollution, you're getting airports being built everywhere. China now is even producing its own plane. China's sending missions to the dark side of the moon. So I think there's communist element is a big part of that bias. I do tend to believe as well that, look, in the Western world, we have this conception that people from Asia can't be creative, that it's almost like we have a monopoly on creativity. We're always surprised when Asians do better. And so I think we have this tendency to always underestimate the resiliency and the hard work, frankly, of Asians. And, today, it's amazing. I was being interviewed by an American TV channel. And one of the first questions they asked was, yeah, but there's no creativity in China. And I said, how'd you figure? They're producing better cars. They're producing better movies. Go see Ne Zha 2. It's the world's highest grossing cartoon. But people hold on to these prejudices long after they're proving to be not true. You can't understand the Chinese progress, the economic progress, the growth that you've seen, etc., if you don't understand the level of competition that most Chinese businesses have to deal with. To be a successful businessman in China means that you're going through just insane levels of competition. And if you don't run twice as fast as the next guy, you're not going to win. If you look at the US, it's okay, they decide to do electric cars. So Essentially, they tell Ford, GM, and Tesla, we'll give you big subsidies to do electric cars. And then GM and Ford fail and Tesla succeeds. And the end result is you get Teslas for 70,000 US dollars, and Elon Musk gets to be worth $100 billion or whatever the number is. In China, capitalism works differently. In China, okay, you know what? We need to produce electric cars. And then what happens is that every local party secretary, every mayor, every provincial governor says, I'm going to call my bank and I'm going to say, hey, Agricultural Bank of China, I've got a local car producer here. You need to give him loans so he can start producing electric cars. And before you know it, you have 130 car producers in China. And it becomes what I've come to call the Hunger Games of capitalism. And this is what happens in industry after industry. But the end winner is actually the consumer, because the consumer, instead of having one guy who's worth $100 billion like Elon Musk, what you end up with is many car companies, and the consumer in China today has a wide choice of cars that are much cheaper than cars anywhere else in the world, and sometimes now much better than cars. And this is how capitalism is supposed to be. More competition. Capitalism isn't supposed to be one or two companies like Microsoft, Google, Tesla that control an entire industry and make super fat margins and end up in a quasi-monopoly situation and then spend a bunch of money lobbying the government to maintain their quasi-monopoly situations. That's not what capitalism is about. Capitalism is about companies fighting it out, and yes, like sometimes making very, very slim margins. Now, that's part of the equation. The other part of the equation is a government that does deliver on infrastructure needs. So it does deliver on the roads, does deliver on the railroads, does deliver on the airports, and basically on the backbone that you need to have a modern economy, does deliver on the electricity grid. And now a lot of people say, oh yeah, but they've overinvested in this, et cetera. And that's probably true. But I think if you're the Chinese government, you say, okay, we're never going to hit it quite right. Like we're not going to hit the perfect number for investment. So do we want to overinvest or do we want to underinvest? If you underinvest, you end up with power outages, which means that you're then hurting industry. It always makes sense to overinvest. So the whole system in China is built towards always excess competition and excess overinvestment. That's how the system works. But that's how you get a lot of progress, and that's how you take out, whatever it is, 600 or 700 million out of poverty. So I think like nobody had China catching up on AI as quickly as they've done on their bingo card. It's been a very rapid development. I think it's very exciting. It highlights a number of trends. One of the reasons the US was so successful was you had the whole Silicon Valley ecosystem, right? And it seems pretty obvious to me now that there's a whole ecosystem in Hangzhou. You look at all these companies that are coming out, they seem to be all in Hangzhou now. You have a whole ecosystem in Shenzhen. So you already have like two Silicon Valleys now. China has caught up on AI. China hasn't yet caught up on semiconductors, but clearly the government is throwing money at this. It's throwing human resources at this. When you look at pretty much every major semiconductor company in the world, whether TSMC, NVIDIA, Broadcom, AMD, now Intel, they're all run by people of Chinese ancestry. Now, maybe Taiwanese, so very clearly there's something in the Chinese culture that like works well with semiconductors. So I think, China will catch up. Now, look, I've been thinking for more than a year that it's Chinese equity is the place you want to be today. Look, the way I look at it, Chinese equities right now are still not very expensive. They have massive government support. Because bond yields are very low in China, retail investors are taking money out of the bank. Like you're earning 0% at the bank. You're still getting good dividend yields on a lot of stocks. So the gap between dividend yield and bond yields is close to record highs. You've got strong momentum now after a lot of bad momentum. So, you go through your checklist. It's like, okay, good valuation, good momentum, good policy support, good earnings yields. It's like check, 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 check. If you don't buy now, when are you going to buy? So I am optimistic on China. Again, I think it's the most competitive economy in the world. I think that's a fact. It's not an opinion.
And that brings us to the end of this edition of China Now with me, Makiza Latifa. From the latest developments in China to in-depth discussions with leading thinkers, we hope today's insights have given you a deeper understanding of China's evolving role in the world. Stay tuned for more updates, expert analysis, and engaging conversations next time. Until then, stay informed and see you soon.